course. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker to you. She is Dr. Thereza Bothma. Dr. Bothma is currently the Senior Psychologist at the WCED Head Office, the Directorate, Specialized or Inclusive and Specialized Education Support. She's a counseling psychologist and a qualified teacher, and has completed her PhD in child psychology on attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We're honored to have Dr. Bothma with us, and she's taken time out of her busy schedule to share her knowledge and expertise with us. Welcome, Dr. Bothma. Thank you for joining us. The session is yours.
Thank you, Liesl. I will go straight ahead to my presentation so that we can start there. And then the questions will be answered right at the end of my session, of my presentation. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Today I'm going to tell you more about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And for me, it's important not only to identify those learners, but also how are we going to support them? Because as you know, in your class and in your school, you will definitely have quite a few of these learners, and sometimes you don't know how to deal with them. So the first slide, I'm going to tell you the definition. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder. It's not something that they can help for. It is there in the brain, and it usually consists out of 2 or 3 primary characteristics, which is inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. So when you look at those 3 things, it's like playing cards. Every person will have a different combination of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Not 2 learners in your school will be exactly the same or have the same symptoms. Now, I'm just going to quickly touch on what symptoms do you see, and these will be the secondary symptoms that you will see in the class. Now, you must remember that these symptoms must be present for at least 6 months. It must be inconsistent with the developmental level. So what I mean by that is, if you are working with a 5-6-year-old, yes, it's more normal for them and acceptable for them to move around and to be more active and to be more inattentive. But when we work with a learner of, say, 12, we are then expect certain maturity in being able to focus and being able to not walk around, get out of their chair, etc. So when we look at inattention, it is usually your daydreamer. Symptoms that comes like careless mistakes, difficulty in sustaining the attention. And I usually say the easiest way of noticing these learners, if you page through their book and it says work incomplete, and then also they lose things. It's almost as if they in la la land, because they don't focus, they can't sustain the attention. Let's look at the next one. Hyperactivity, impulsivity. Also, 6 or more of these symptoms must be present, and it must have a negative impact on their social, academic, and occupational activities. They usually fidget a lot. They leave their chair in the class without you asking. They run around or they climb up in high trees on the roof of the school. They're often unable to engage in leisure activities. It's almost like they're driven by a motor. They talk excessively. They even make noises in your class, or when they blurt out the answers before you even have asked the question. They also find it very difficult to wait their turn. Those are the learners that you will say form a line and they will push in right in front of all the other learners. They also interrupt others, or if you ask something for them to do, they will organize everybody and say, I want to do it. I want to play my game. You are not allowed to play your game. And then the diagnostic criteria. Before the age of 12, these symptoms must be present. And then also in more than one setting. You can't only see these symptoms at school. You must also experience them at home, or the parents must see it at home. The easiest way we usually pick these learners up is we're in a setting where they have to sit still. Then you will notice them easily. It must also interfere with their daily life. And then there must be no other psychiatric disorders present, like other mental disorders, anxiety, depression, because then those kind of symptoms of, let's say, a mood disorder can also present as if it is an inattentive learner. When we go to the ADHD, we also have to specify which type. You've got 3 types. All of them starts with ADHD. And then you get the first one predominantly inattentive. That's your daydreamer. The next one is an easy one to diagnose because they're hyperactive and they're impulsive. But the third one is the combined type. It's a little bit of everything. They're a little bit inattentive, they're a little bit hyperactive, and they're a little bit impulsive. So that's the combined one. Then we also have to look at whether it's affecting them in a mild way or moderate or severe. So even if the learners have got a mild severity of ADHD, you can still kind of deal easier with it. It's when it gets to the severe form of ADHD that it's really impacting their functionality. Now, the prevalence is 3 to 7% of school-age children have got ADHD. Now, that's quite a high percentage, and even sometimes it's higher because we tend to forget about the inattentive type. It's easier to diagnose the hyperactive impulsive one, and therefore it's sometimes come across as if less. It is something, the prevalence is across all cultures, and the ratio is for every male, or for every male to a female, it's 4 to 1. So the males have got more ADHD than females. It's not necessarily like that, because your girls tend to have more the inattentive type, and they often go undiagnosed or untreated. And then 60% of learners will carry these symptoms right into adulthood. So it also comes across with adults. It's not only children that can have ADHD. 32 to 40% are the ones that drop out of school. And that's a sad thing, because usually it's the school system that caused them to drop out and not the ADHD, because you get so fed up of these learners and you sometimes just wish that they can stay at home and that you can have like an easy day at school. But until the day that they decide I had enough, then they become a dropout. And I'll tell you why. 70 to 80% of them are underachievers because they usually have the potential, the cognitive potential, but because of other symptoms, like for instance, it's affecting their reading, the ability to stay in the class, that causes them to underachieve and then fail, and then they become a dropout. 40% of learners with ADHD is usually under the teenage pregnancy group. And I usually say the other 60% make them pregnant with ADHD. So if you look at 20 to 30% can come across as depressed and 50% anxiety. And this is a scary factor because they kind of hide the fact that they're depressed, or they say things are bored, or I don't want to play, or they are so anxious, but they don't want to show this. And that is why I'm quite concerned that we need to watch these children very closely. Where does it stem from? There are different reasons why we get ADHD. The one that we definitely know is that it is genetic. The genetic factor from fathers to sons are very high. And then also from fathers to daughters less, but it's also there. Children with who are born prematurely, they will definitely also manifest with symptoms of ADHD. And then parents who have been smoking, using alcohol, using TIC, their learners or their children might also have symptoms of ADHD. And then also, if we look at causes, things that cannot cause ADHD, and that is with how you raise your children. Those are the things that can have an influence, but it cannot cause ADHD, because we must remember it's a neurodevelopmental diagnosis. So these things postnatal cannot cause it. It can just make it more or less the symptoms. If we look at what part of the brain is usually showing all of these symptoms, and that's the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe are responsible for analyzing, judgment, and memory. Now, if you look at a child with ADHD, they cannot delay, they cannot analyze the situation, they do not have good judgment, and they tend to forget things easily. So you can see why the frontal lobe are so important, and that because of the frontal lobe being affected, that is why they also show all these symptoms. Now, the easiest way that I can explain to you ADHD is, if you look at the brain is almost in a state of being not wakeful enough. So what happens? The neurons are firing much slower than they're supposed to do. And that is why a stimulant works so well as a medication for learners with ADHD. Because the moment that you give them a stimulant, it stimulates the brain to be in a more state of being wakeful. And then it also stimulates, it's almost like vacuum cleaners sucking back the dopamine. And when you give them the stimulant, it releases the dopamine and the message can go through to the brain and the neurons. So that is why we actually make the brain awake if we give them a stimulant. Now, symptoms, hyperactivity, you can see there in the photo, they're active, they're all over, and sometimes you will also experience this in the class. The symptoms of hyperactivity: fidget, they can't sit still, they can't fall or stay asleep, they don't like sleeping, but they are extremely tired the next morning when they have to wake up. Impulsivity is not only the way that you actually, it can be through verbal or with motor. So it is important that you understand impulsivity, because they do not have control over their actions in this regard. They talk excessively. They interrupt constantly. They can't wait their turn. They're impatient. They've got a very low frustration level. They can be involved with abusive behavior, and they're attracted to danger. And the unpredictability of their behavior are sometimes the worst enemy. If we look at the inattentiveness, that you can easily see with the little kittens there. The one that's not paying attention, that is the one that is in their own world. The inability to attend, difficult to follow instructions. If you tell them in the class, take out your maths book, open it on page 30 and start with exercise 3, and remember to write your date and to remember to draw a line. You've lost them because you cannot give so many instructions at once. They will completely not know where to start. So they are so easily distracted. In the time that you are giving instructions, they will follow everybody around them. They will watch them. They will see how far they are. When did they start writing? And those are the things that will draw their attention. The differential diagnosis, and that is the difficult part when working with ADHD. It's very rarely that you will only get symptoms of ADHD. They might have other diagnoses as well. Oppositional defiant, intermittent explosive disorder, a specific learning disorder, because you must remember they've been in a class unable to attend to what the teacher has said. So easily the building blocks of being able to read, being able to do maths has been formed. And that is why they then develop specific learning disorder. Then also autism spectrum disorder can also be one of the symptoms that I can also have. Depression and anxiety I have already mentioned. And you can see there are so many other things that looks like ADHD, but you have to be very clear when you make the diagnosis that you know that you are stick to the symptoms and what they have. The comorbid conditions is, as I've said, specific learning disorder, a very severe form of conduct disorder, positional defiant disorder, even fetal alcohol syndrome also manifest with symptoms of ADHD. So you need to know what are you working with. And for me, it's not only important to know the diagnosis, but how we're going to support these learners, because I don't only want us to say this learner have got a specific learning disorder with ADHD. For me, it's important once you know what you are going to work with, then it's easier to support these learners. So how do we make the diagnosis? It is a detailed history that you have to take. You have to observe the child. The symptoms must be there before the age of 12. The age be age inappropriate. It must be present for longer than 6 months, and it must be in more than one setting. So it's important that you do this diagnosis over time, that you know exactly what to look for. And remember, teachers can never make a diagnosis. They can only write down the symptoms that they see and then convey that to the psychologist so that you've got a better idea of what you have observed in the class. There are no X-rays or laboratory tests that you can do to confirm the diagnosis. It is important that you know. There's now the latest research show us that if we do an EEG, that yes, it does show a difference in brain activity and on brain imaging. So if you look at the brain of a child without ADHD, you can see on the left-hand side how the brain looks, and the one of ADHD. So you can definitely see the impact of ADHD on the brain. For me, this part is, how are we going to manage this? For me, it's important to make sure that there are no vision or hearing losses, because that can look like symptoms of ADHD, but it actually poor vision or I can't hear. So that is why it looks as if I am in la-la land. A healthy lifestyle. The learner mustn't be tired. Sufficient sleep, a good diet. The moment that you give any learner a lot of sweets, they all will be hyperactive. So a diet won't take it away. It will just lessen the symptoms. Medication is one of the ways that we can manage attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. For me, it's important to also support parents, children, and teachers, and then also a behavior management program. So if we look at sleep, at least 8 hours of sleep for these learners. As I've said, the diet, a healthy diet with a lot of omega and fatty acids. Because if we look at a natural way of omega, that is, we know that omega-3 and omega-6 are very important as a natural way of lessening the symptoms of ADHD. Enough water, and then also exercise to release some of the symptoms and the need to move. If we look at medication, there are 2 types of medications that works with children with ADHD. The stimulants and then the non-stimulants. And usually when we talk about a stimulant, it can be Ritalin and Concerta, or the non-stimulants are Strattera. Now for me, the use of a medication is the last resort. There are so many things that one can first do until you have to turn to the medication. Social support. It's very important for everybody to be involved. And that is why the teacher, the parent, the family, everybody must be on board when we work with children with ADHD. Because everybody in this child's life sometimes have something negative to say. When they leave the morning, usually they forgot something at home. When they get to school, the other children will tell them, did you remember your 5 rand? No, I didn't. And then also when they step into the class, they realize I've never studied for my test. And then they start to develop a low self-esteem. And that is actually the worst enemy of themselves, if to have a low self-esteem. Because now they're going to start to join other groups with low self-esteem. And before you realize they're involved with, how can I say, bad behavior or challenging behavior, because that's the group that will accept them. Because nobody focuses on what they can do well. They will only focus on what they can't do. It's important for parents and teachers to discuss the learners, but not only the bad behavior or the challenging behavior, but also what these learners can do well. Behavior management, impulsivity, how are we going to, in the class, manage this? By clear rules. If the child knows what is going to be expected of him, for instance, if they shout out the answer, but you've got a rule, nobody's shouting out answers, you have to put up your hand. That is then a guide for the learner not to shout out answers. Also to avoid battles. Remember, these learners have been like this since birth. So they're masters in causing a battle, because the moment that I cause a battle in class, I don't have to work. So avoid these battles and don't address them in front of the other learners. Because I usually say you can have either a devil in your class or an angel in your class, because if you connect with these learners, you will get so much more out of them. But if you go against these learners, especially in front of other learners, you will definitely, go into a conflict. So positive reinforcement is a better choice than just punishing them or saying bad things to them in front of the other learners. Behavior management, alerting them to messages 1, 2, 3, and then you give an instruction, because that will take them out of the little la-la land so that they know an instruction is going to follow. If you've got a task for them, divide it into smaller pieces. Like, for instance, if they have to do 10 sums, you only give them 2. And once they've done the 2, you say, great stuff, here's another 2. And that is how they will eventually also get to tantrums. And also to remove potentially distracting features. You will never place a learner with inattention next to the door because they will constantly look who's walking past or not close to the bin, and because everybody's coming to throw stuff in the bin and they will look at them every time. Something that they're not good at is executive function. Executive functioning is the way that you can organize your life around you. And they've got difficulty with that. These are the learners that will constantly lose things. They will also forget books at home, or they do not know where to find whatever they brought the morning to school. It's a good thing to have a routine, a very good routine for these learners. And that is the end of the day to pack their bags. It's not that you're going to pack it, but they have to follow a certain end of the day checklist. Do I have my books in? Do I have this? Do I have that? And then also to color code books and materials for them. Because if I know that I'm writing maths in a red book, then I know I must put in my red book. Time clocks for time organization is also a very good thing because time does not exist for people with ADHD. If you tell them you need to be finished in 10 minutes time, it's just as well you give them 2 hours because for them time is not a fixed amount of minutes in an hour. Executive functioning is also a processing information, to process information. They've got very poor judgment skills. They can't think if I'm doing this, this is going to be the consequence. They don't have very good judgment skills. And then also, if you say, if you are going to complete this work, I will reward you with, let's say, 5-minute extra play in the class. Today they will be so happy to do it. Tomorrow you can't convince them to work because they do not have that transition of something, if I do it, it will be less consequences. They don't take that knowledge over to the next activity. Secondary symptoms that might come, they find difficulty with reading. They don't like reading. They don't like writing. Some of them are good at mathematics, but also it's an effort if I have to do 20, say, sums. It looks such a lot. It looks like climbing out Kilimanjaro, so I'd rather not do it. So you constantly have to remind them to do at least 2 or 3 and then again chunk it up in shorter pieces. And then memory deficits. They will know the work while they're studying at home, but when the test results comes back, they're not doing so well. The biggest thing that they are grappling with are social skills. They find it very difficult to make friends and to keep friends. Poor interpersonal relationships. If they go out on the playground, and then they will easily tell you, I don't have friends, I don't like to play with friends, they don't want me as a friend, because they don't know how to make friends and how to keep friends. And they show no remorse after doing something wrong. Learners may need more breaks during the day. So if you do brain gym in between, they will fare much better. If you have a short break in the class while the period is still on, just break that up so that you can at least give them a small break that they can go back and do their work. Also snack. Some of them will be hungry, so allow them to have a fruit snack or an apple halfway through the work. And they might need one-on-one teaching to consolidate their work. Repetitions of information, very important because of the memory problem that they do have. So what can I do? Compile information on ADHD, exactly what you are doing now, so that you know what ADHD is. It is also important to look at the learner's profile so that you know, was this learner, were there any deficits already since birth, during birth, after birth, that you know your learner. Functional assessment and then also behavior interventions are very important to build a positive behavior strategy in your class, not the negative one. Don't look at what they are doing wrong. Catch them when they are doing something right. If we look at functional assessment, you look at the problem behavior that comes. You look at what exactly did you give an instruction, for instance, in maths. You look at the baseline assessment, the timeline, what time of the day did this behavior occur, and what was the goal of this behavior? What do they want to reach with this challenging behavior? Positive behavior strategies. Look at the physical environment in the class. Look at your class management strategies. How do you present your lessons? How do you give assignments? How do you assess these learners? And how do you manage the learner's behavior? If we look a little bit closer to the physical environment, place the learner where there are less distractions. Define their workplace. Remember, they need to move. So allow them a space where they can get out of their desk and where they're allowed to stand. Have a study corner where they can go to when they feel that they're going to lose it. Place them near to where your favorite spot is in the class so that you can just kind of tap on the desk and say, come start, or make use of earphones when they're easily distracted by noise. Help to develop a positive behavior strategy to manage their behavior. Make your timetable predictable, that they know exactly what's going to happen today. Because the moment that it's unpredictable, the anxiety levels goes up and you will have bad behavior. Also, to change from one subject over to the other. Make use of music that they know when I hear that song, we're going to change over from maths to maybe reading. Or to do something in the class like your brain gym to get rid of the excess energy. And don't forget about your rules. Your lesson presentation. Have a brisk pace. Be enthusiastic. Bring in humor. Be flexible. And then also help them to identify keywords when they have to summarize their work. Cooperative learning is also a good strategy to use in your class. These learners also need a buddy because they don't write down their homework. So when they get back home, they don't know what to do. And simplify instructions. Know your learner's style. And then also differentiate their work. If they need to work on a different level, be aware of how you can do that. And then, as I've said already, use your color, novelties, and then also to give them a to-do list and what to pack. If we look at assessment accommodations, these learners will do quite well with extra time, writing in a separate venue, and to have a prompter. And they are, if you have got the diagnosis, you can also apply for an assessment accommodation. Managing learners' behavior, teach them to make decisions. Tell them that every choice has got a certain responsibility and a consequence. And also to become more independent and build on your learner's self-esteem. Also to do self-monitoring and work on a reward system rather than punish. If we go and we look at the 3 F's, failure, fear, and frustration. These learners with ADHD many times experience failure because they find that they might not be as good as others. They fear every day that they will be rejected. And then the frustration, because yesterday I've studied for my work, but today I don't know my work. So you need to look at how you're going to prevent failure, fear, and frustration for these learners. Then my 1 to 9 rule is for every negative thing that you say to a learner with ADHD, you have to come up with 9 positive things to cancel that one negative thing. So that is why I'd rather say, don't say that one negative thing, because it's going to take you 9 positive things that you have to find within an ADHD learner to cancel that one. And that's not always easy working with an ADHD child. As with any other child, the school experience can build or destroy the sense of self. And that is why I would request all of you to rather work on how we can build these learners the sense of self than breaking it down. Famous people with ADHD. You will see there are quite a few. This is only a few of the people that were diagnosed with ADHD. Alexander Graham Bell. We can look at Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein, and then Mr. Woolworths. That's the department store. He started that, and it's all over in South Africa. So yes, your ADHD person have got a lot of potential. So that is my last slide. And if there are any questions, I'm willing to answer them and to assist you in how you can go about in assisting your learners with ADHD in the class. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bothma. Wow, I'm sure you'll all agree we've learned a lot. I've got some questions for you. Let's see how many we can get through. The first question is from C. White. I'm not quite sure what he means, but let me read it to you. Would you say that stimulants would be the best for learners than the medication? I think that was in the beginning when you were talking about stimulants.
Okay, a stimulant is a medication. You can get the medications that I've mentioned, your Ritalins, your Concertas, and your Strattera. Those are usually your prescribed medications. And then you can also go and get your IQ, you can get your BioStrath, which is actually just a supplement, because you can buy it through the chemist. It's on the shelf. So it's mostly consists out of omega-3s and 6, which you can drink with your medication. So if the symptoms of ADHD is really severe, remember I've also said when it's low, moderate, or severe, it's usually your children with severe symptoms that will benefit from taking medication that's prescribed to them. Otherwise, you can just use the supplements and see how you can lessen the symptoms for those learners.
Thank you.
Sure.
No, I hope that answered this question. The next one is from Chantal Daniels. She says, you said that by 12 years of age, we will know if they could possibly have ADHD and dependent on home environment. Is grade 1 too young to have ADHD? As I feel I have a few of them in my class that fits the description. My connection is bad, so I apologize if I misunderstood.
You are 100% correct. You can make the diagnosis already by the age of 5, 6. And as I say, in grade 1, definitely. What I mean by the age of 12, you cannot suddenly see the symptoms for the first time at the age of 14. Because why didn't you see the symptoms or diagnose the symptoms much earlier? So you're right if you say yes, by the age of 5, 6, 7, you will definitely see the symptoms of ADHD, and you can start to support them.
I hope that answered your question, Chantal. Liesl Williams asks, hello, I would like to know how you could tell the difference between a learner with ADHD and one that has oppositional defiant disorder.
Okay, that's quite an easy one because your ADHD learner will only present with the 3 symptoms that I've said: your inattentiveness, your hyperactivity, and your impulsivity. Your oppositional defiant child will literally go against any instruction that you give them. So you will see that they are very difficult to work with, that they will be, how can I explain to you? They will define anything that you suggest. If you say, okay, but just try the 2, no, I don't want to. So you can't get them to work with you. It's a very difficult. Oppositional defiant are one of the biggest grapples of learners who were identified with that. Usually they need additional medication, not only the stimulants that I've talked about, but you will definitely refer them to a psychiatrist, because the kind of medication that they will need will be more intense than just your stimulants that I've talked about, or the non-stimulants like your strateras. There will be other things that you have to do with him. They also find that the parents can't sometimes deal with them at home. You have to look after them. They can sometimes be so angry that they will hurt dogs, they will hurt other brothers and sisters. And it's not all of them that will do it, but sometimes they will even do things out of anger, frustration. They will lit a fire within the house. So you really have to guard them very closely because it's not an easy diagnosis to work with.
Thank you for that question. Mr. White asks, or C. White asks, when they display that they do understand the work do we still need to apply for accommodations?
You must remember it's not all children with ADHD that will need an assessment accommodation, but you can go into a trial period where you trial by giving them extra time, because a lot of children with ADHD have got a lot of mannerisms before they start to really write their answers down. They will, for instance, first look at all the children in the class. They look at the teacher. They know exactly what the teacher have got on today. They will make funny faces to other learners, and then only they realize, oh, I must start. And the rest of the class have done already, say, 5 questions. So those are the kind of things that they don't have control over because of the delay in starting. They procrastinate a lot. And that is why additional time works so well with them, and also a prompter. Because if you give them a prompter, the prompter will say, there's 5 minutes left or 10 minutes left, or you have to start now with the next question. It's not that the prompter will give them answers. It's just like indicating to them that they have to start to work. That is why additional time in a prompter and a separate venue works so well with learners with ADHD, because there's less distraction when they write their tests in a separate venue. So it's not all of them. It depends on the severity.
Thank you. Got another question from Ms. Williams. She says, I've tried everything with her: rewards, charts, positive reinforcement. What can be done?
I would like to know if the learner is on medication, because once you've tried all those things and the learner is still struggling in doing what is expected of them, then usually one will go the medication route, because it tells you then that, you know, they've got a very severe form of ADHD. And remember, it's in the brain. We can't see right in the brain of the learner. So that is why it's such a a difficult diagnosis to work with, because a lot of these things are on trial and error, that you have to say, if I do this, what is the reaction? And also to look at medication in that sense is when you have tried everything. That is why I said medication is the last resort, but it can also work well if you see the learner really needs to be on medication.
I'm just getting quite a few teachers commenting on it and saying, yes, they have similar scenarios. There's one saying that she's already decided to take it on herself to make sure all are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and she's irritates the others, and she's so bossy. So I'm assuming she's talking about one of the learners. Just going to this is from Mr. Caputo. It says, Doctor, I have a learner since grade 2. He is currently in grade 4. We had to homeschool him because of his outbursts in the class. He also, our grade 4 educator, is not equipped to deal with him. Very strong academically, antisocial. We're waiting on our district to place him in a school that can support him. It doesn't say what the diagnosis was.
Okay. And that's why I say it's so important that you work with a support system, that you get the right diagnosis and that you get, if it needed, the right medication. Because for a teacher in a class with 30, 40 learners, it's very difficult to deal with them if you don't have a support system. And as you know, you can reach out to your district where there are psychologists that can assist. And even if it needs further referral, then they will assist you in that regard to get you referred to a psychiatrist if needed.
This Ms. Williams says again, she says, sorry, me again. What you're saying at the moment, this is when you were referring to the ODD child, is spot on. With the little girl in my class, we referred her to Tygerberg, but the psychiatrist just upped her Ritalin dose. What can I do now? So I think this is quite a good pathway for her to understand the whole process with the SBST into the DBST and then the DBST doing further referrals. Do you want to explain that to her, please?
Remember, we have got also a very good relationship with the Department of Health, whereas if we really get a learner like that we need a psychiatrist to come on board, we can reach out to them. We can say, listen, we have tried all of this now we need your intervention as well, because sometimes they think by upping only the Ritalin that's going to help, but sometimes these learners need additional support or other medications. And it's only when you give feedback to the doctor in saying, listen, although you have upped the Ritalin dosage, the symptoms are still present. So they will only know if you have given feedback to them. And then you can say, I've tried this and this and this, but it's not working. So give feedback to the psychiatrist at Tygerberg Hospital or where you where the doctor is, so that they can also know that everything that they have recommended is not working. So you need additional support in that regard.
I just think she must also be aware if she needs to work through the parents and get parental permission.
When you work through CIAS process, and remember it's a support way, it's not a referral tool. It is a way of determining the level of support that's going to be needed for this learner. So if you use the CIAS as a tool to say what level of support this learner needs, then you will have to get the parents' consent, because as soon as you start with the CIAS process, you need the consent of the parents. But even if you have to refer further, there are annexures at the back of the CIAS which are made there. So if you need to refer the learner to Department of Health, the parent must give consent, but then you also get the buy-in of those support structures at, for instance, Tygerberg or Red Cross Hospital, because they're quite familiar with our system, and they refer quite often learners from the Red Cross Tygerberg to the different districts for also to assist them. So we work very closely. So just find out at your district how you can access the support of your different hospitals as well to support you in that way as well.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sure that helped you. That was a very comprehensive answer. Anisha has written a long one here. She says, I have a learner who wasn't diagnosed with anything, but he has many outbursts in the classroom. He cries loudly, hits the other children, and says he's testing his strength. He doesn't like following instructions and never makes eye contact. It's something so simple. It takes something so simple to push him off the edge, like not giving him a certain color he wanted. I've tried everything. I know, but he still has these outbursts. When he doesn't feel like doing his work, he starts to scream. His mother says it's because she has a new baby. Could this lead to this behavior? He was like this all year. He hits me and my assistant when he's angry and just starts to scream.
Okay, quite a complex case, because yes, as you've just said, there's a new baby in the family. So what does this learner experience? Suddenly he's not the center of attraction in the family anymore. He must get used to new circumstances. It can also be of prior trauma. We must not forget the influence of trauma on our learners' behavior, because that also influences the way in which they can go about in learning. And I think in the past 2 years with COVID, a lot of our learners have lost family members, have lost income, have lost so many changes in their life, which also caused them to experience a lot of trauma. So put that together with ADHD, with feeling neglected in a family, then you will have a recipe like what you've just said. They can't express themselves verbally. So how do they go about in acting out? So one needs to take this in consideration in unpacking, not necessarily to focus on the behavior, but to ask what has happened to this child, and not look at the behavior and say this and this and that, but what happened to this child. So I will definitely engage much closer with the parents, and also to advise them to spend special time with this learner so that they don't experience the neglect what he or the child currently experience maybe at home. And if the child starts to scream like that, if we don't put other structures in place and showing them that, you know, this is unacceptable behavior, but when he doesn't scream, to reward him, but to ignore the screaming. So, and to have a cool down corner in the class, that you don't take him out of the class, but to have a corner where they know I can go to that corner if I feel that I'm going to lose it. So you build such a lot of structures in that you can contain this child in class, but with the help of parents and with the help of your support structures at the district office. Call them in, ask them to assist you in that regard as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't think there's any more questions that have popped into the chat box. I think that was a very comprehensive overview. So to teachers, colleagues, guests, we've come to the end of our meeting, and on behalf of the CTLI, I would like to extend a huge thank you to our guest, Dr. Thereza Bothma, and to all our teachers who tuned in this afternoon. We had